Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North on this Wednesday, July 31st, 2024. Hope you're having a wonderful day, whether you're tuning in live or catching us on podcast, catching us on any one of the numerous platforms on which we broadcast, although not Facebook. You may recall Facebook shut down Canadian media after Bill C-18, the so-called Online News Act, was passed. We still, from time to time, get messages from people that missed all the backstory and are just wondering why they can't see us on Facebook. It's because, well, you can't see any news on Facebook for the time being. But nevertheless, this is where we are going as a country. Now, we will talk about something very, very... I think it's going to be a big announcement. I think it's going to be a special announcement a little bit later on in the show. That'll be coming up after we get through some of the topics I did want to definitely tackle. We'll be discussing with James Pugh his piece in C2C Journal on the really takeover in Canadian schools and Canadian classrooms of critical theory and why that matters, why parents should be, he thinks anyway, a bit alarmed about it. Also, we'll talk in a few moments to our good friend Kris Sims, a rare Wednesday appearance on the Andrew Lawton Show about why taxes are eating up such a disproportionate share of your household budget. Canadians now spending more on taxes than they are on the necessities of life, which includes food, shelter, and even clothing. We will also, I just want to start off, though, this happened this morning. Now, Israel has been in the last couple of days undergoing some pretty significant operations. Israel, I just got a report about an hour ago, it seems like, or has taken out a key Iranian operative, an IRGC leader in Damascus, Syria. That one has a bit less confirmation to it than taking out Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was in Iran. Now, normally the Hamas leadership is holed up in Qatar. They don't actually want to be hanging out in Gaza and actually living with the life that they have subjected the citizens of Gaza to. So they hole up in luxury housing in Qatar. But for whatever reason, he was in Iran, perhaps because Iran has been a state sponsor of terror and a state sponsor of Hamas. But Israel got a hold of him and took him out. Now, this is as legitimate a move as it gets as far as a country taking aim at the leader of a terror group that has terrorized and threatened its citizens. But not everyone was too pleased with this assassination. There was one CBC reporter, Kris Brown, a foreign correspondent, who had posted this morning. He said, if you are serious about negotiating a ceasefire, killing the guy on the other side who is negotiating, it seems, ... like a deliberate effort to make sure it doesn't happen. Now, this post was quickly seized on by conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who shared this as he talked about destroying Hamas and defunding the CBC. He basically says CBC, and not the whole state broadcaster, but certainly this contributor, seemed to be mourning the loss of the leader of Hamas, Poilievre wrote. Now, this prompted a follow-up post from Kris Brown not that long ago, who wrote that his initial tweet didn't include enough context, likely better to save the analysis of its implications for longer formats. So this is basically where we are at now. There's a lot of this in the media where Israel taking out the leader of a terror group, or a leader of a terror group, is now seen as something that should be subjected to, well, I don't know, maybe that wasn't the best move, which is just a level of, I'd say, disingenuousness that does not, I mean, that word doesn't really cut it, but it's a level of false equivalence and moralizing that just doesn't fly with the reality of this conflict. But anyway, that just happened this morning, so I wanted to share a few moments of that. But what we do know is that there are two certainties in life, death and taxes. I guess we're doing both in the show, because we started off with the death of a Hamas leader. Now we'll pivot to taxes. And the reality, as in a Fraser Institute study that came out this week, that Canadians are spending a massive increased share of their income on taxes. We know that cost of living is an insane problem that Canadians are dealing with. We know inflation has run rampant, not quite at the record levels that we had about a year or so ago, but inflation is still on the rise. grocery costs are still putting Canadian families into tremendous, tremendous hardship. And what we find out now is that most of what you're paying for in your household budget, even if you don't see it, is taxes, more than food, shelter, and housing combined. So you think housing's expensive, groceries are expensive, new clothes are expensive. Yeah, well, put it all together, and it's still not what you're spending on taxes. I want to welcome in to the show Kris Sims. We just talked to her on Monday, but generally speaking, our rule is that we can't get enough of Kris Sims on the show. So we're bringing her back now because who better to unpack this than the Alberta director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris, always good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on today. So this has happened before. This isn't the first time a study of this nature, which in this case was done by the Fraser Institute, has revealed this, but we're still seeing over time that share of your household budget, that share of your money that's going to taxes, is still on the rise.
Yeah, the Fraser Institute does great work on this. And so once a year, they put out a big report where they explain and show that nearly half of what you pay is taxes. So people probably are familiar with that term. That's usually because of the Fraser Institute's report on this. Now, again, this wasn't really surprising to tax nerds like me because it's more than 40% is what you're paying out is in taxes. So just kind of imagine. Close your eyes if it's safe to do so. Imagine your salary, your take-home pay that automatically arrives in your bank account, suddenly doubling. What could you do with that amount of money? Well, that's because close to half of what you make is taken away in taxes. What I found really interesting here, Andrew, about this time of year and this time around is exactly what you point out. Even with the crazy inflation of things like food and housing especially, it's still higher. Your tax share is still higher. That was actually a bit startling to me.
Yeah, because obviously there's a level of this that is always going to be proportionate. So sales taxes, 13% of, your grocery, well, not your groceries, it's a bit different, but 13% of a thing you buy, of that shirt you buy at Walmart or whatever. And if the shirt price goes up, so too does what 13% is in the case of me being in Ontario. And
yeah.
Same as housing. If your home value is going up, your property taxes are going to go up. If rent seems to be going up across the board. So that all would keep it relatively stagnant. But we're still finding ways that government is doing this. And as I understand it, this is taking into account all levels, right? So the tax man coming at you from the federal, provincial, and municipal level.
Yes, exactly. And so I think it was from their report, I saw a really good breakdown that was being shared on X yesterday, where they're showing how much typically a family that makes around, say, $105,000 per year combined was paying in their taxes. And you're right. It was everything from their local municipal level property taxes and fees, because that's just another fancy way to say tax, provincial level, okay, depending on where you live, and then federal level. Again, that is a huge bite out of your bottom line bill. And people should be pretty ticked off about this, because if you picture it, are you really getting good value for money? Like if you sit there and think back to how many times you use a government service like the local healthcare system or the passport office, or see how quickly your potholes are being filled or litter is being picked up, ask yourself if this is worth half your paycheck.
Yeah, and I've always paid close attention to, I think it was in the US where it first started, Grover Norquist paying attention to it, this thing called Tax Freedom Day, where
That's right.
There's basically a day in the year where if you front loaded your taxes and you paid all your taxes up front, so for the first paychecks, 100% goes to the government, the first dollar you earn for yourself, that day is Tax Freedom Day. And I think in Canada, for most Canadians, this was in June. It just passed not that long ago, which means that you have not earned anything the entire year. You have only been paying the government.
That's right. So from January 1st until I think it was June 17th, I'd have to check, but you're right, it is in June for most Canadians. That entire time, all those late night hours you were putting in, all the times you were rushing in the morning to try to get that extra work done, every single nickel of that, you weren't taking that home. No, you were paying that to various levels of government. And Norquist does a great job because he gives you that visualization. He was also the gentleman that really made it popular to get politicians to sign pledges. Things like, I will not raise taxes. That was very famous with the first President Bush, when he said, read my lips, no new taxes. He broke that Grover Norquist promise, and he was a one-term president. So all of this is to say is things like this Fraser Institute report, they're really important because any politician can look at this, think about it, internalize it, and run on it and change it. Make promises and change things like how much people are getting screwed by taxes. This is exactly why advocacy organizations and think tanks like Taxpayers Federation, like the Fraser Institute, that's why we sit up at night with calculators and figure this out. So anybody, we don't care what color their jersey is, can say, you know what, this is bull. We shouldn't be taxing people to death.
You and I have spoken until the metaphorical tape has broken over and over again about the carbon tax, but for good reason, because it's important. And that is an individual tax that is increasing and is set to increase every single year. The other dimension of this that I think is worth pointing out here is debt. Now, we were talking on Monday when you were on about the debt clock. I recall a couple of years ago, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation had to buy a new debt clock because it ran out of digits. The debt had just risen so much since the first one, which is, hilarious, but also so sad at the same time. But anyway, the reason I bring up debt is because when government incurs debt and has to pay interest on that debt, that means that a portion of the government's money, which is actually our money, is going towards nothing. It's paying interest, which means that that filters down to us. It means more money that we're paying in taxes to pay the interest on the debt just to be broke.
Exactly. So you're right. It was one of those funny lines we were able to use saying, hey, the Trudeau government broke our debt clock, but it was true. So our old debt clock was this repurposed horse trailer. I think somebody had donated it to us, and we had physical, digital blocks in there, but it was only for the billions. And then, of course, the Trudeau government later on this year will have doubled the debt in less than 10 years. So it's now 1.2 trillion. So we needed a bigger debt clock. And you're right.
So just to interrupt there, Kris, do you remember when McDonald's used to have the running tally on how many customers served? And it was I remember there was a period at some point in my childhood that I remember where it was stuck on 999,999,999. And then all the news stores just said over a billion served. And now I think they all just say over billions and billions served. But it's the same idea, except instead of Happy Meals, it's just debt and misery.
Exactly. I don't get my toy with it. Actually, I sat outside of the Chilliwack restaurant for McDonald's to watch them change the sign because it was such a big deal. So part of my childhood too. But yes, you're right. 54 billion with a B dollars is what we're paying just on the interest on the federal debt. Now, to put that into perspective, that's what we are paying this year in GST. So the hated GST that so many people were mad about when Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, rest in peace, brought this in, and something that helped the Canadian Taxpayers Federation get started because it was part of the GST protest, that tax, that is all going to interest on the debt now. That is how much we are paying. And again, this is all part of wasteful spending. If various levels of government didn't blow money on stupid, meaningless things and crony deals for their friends, we wouldn't be paying more than 40% of our income in taxes. Taxes wouldn't be eclipsing our bills for things like food, clothing, and shelter.
All right. Well, people can read more about this at the Fraser Institute, and obviously keep an eye on the debt clock whenever it rolls through your town. And at a certain point, we'll need another digit on there. But hopefully, we get our act together far before that time. Kris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Thanks for everything, Kris. Always good to talk to you.
It's been a real pleasure. Great show, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Kris. We'll turn to one example of how government is spending your money. This is at the provincial level, but there was a great piece in the C2C Journal that looked into critical theory taking over Canadian schools. Now, this is one of these things that may sound abstract. You may not give it any mind at all, which is perhaps why this problem has existed and continues to. And I think this started in the United States, or certainly got a foothold in the United States. But in Canada, there's been a general sleepiness in parents getting involved in what is being taught in the classroom. I think we saw last fall, there was a bit of an upswing in this discussion. You had talk about parental rights, but even then that was more surrounding gender issue and less to do with the curriculum. But James Pugh, who's the publisher of Woke Watch Canada, has written in the C2C Journal, as I mentioned, a piece called Transforming Children. And it is our pleasure to have him on the show now. James, thanks for coming on today. Good to speak to you.
Hey, Andrew.
So let's bring this back to basics here. What is critical theory and how does it end up in Canadian classrooms?
Well, it's really bizarre because it started out as an academic theory, so something that like university students would be studying. It's a neo-Marxist framework where it's like a method of analyzing society, and it's a negatively skewed method. So it sees everything to do with capitalism, Western society, liberalism. It sees that in a very negative light, and you could say that critical theory is anti-Western, anti-capitalism, anti all of the institutions that make up Western society, even things like the nuclear family and the Western canon and the Christian church and everything that we associate Western civilization with, they seem to oppose and view it in a very negative light.
When I was in university doing political science, it was often the case that we'd learn about different theories. We'd learn a Marxist would think this, and a postmodernist would think, well, they wouldn't think at all usually, but let's say a postmodernist would think this, or someone, in foreign policy, someone thinks this. The issue that we have now is that the theory has been just accepted, and teaching seems to be constructed through the lens of this theory. Am I missing the mark on that?
I think you're totally right about that. You see this all across the media. Wherever the media just says something, like the ongoing genocide in Canada, the ongoing, or the history of genocide. If they just say these things as if they're true, as opposed to them being sort of an issue that's debatable, a little bit gray. There's some people that might characterize certain things that happened in Canada's history as maybe genocidal or culturally genocidal, and other people who think that, no, you're talking about assimilation and integration of Indigenous peoples into a modern way. So this happens all over the place, where they talk about the ongoing persecution of people, or it's just assumptions where they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be talked about it as if they're fact. They're contested ideas, and that's not how the activists ever portray them.
So a lot of people have heard, and I think a lot of this was spillover from United States discussions where parents have really engaged at the school board level, critical race theory. Now, as I understand it, critical race theory is really a subset of critical theory, correct?
Yeah. Yep. There's so is critical gender theory. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned in your comments off the top, there was about the parent pushback. The parent right movement was more seemed to be concerned with that. But the gender issue is sort of, you fold that into the basket of critical theories. Critical theories about the people that they deem to be when I say they, I'm talking about the critical social justice activists. They deem certain people in a society to be equity deserving. They call these people historically marginalized. So sometimes these people are historically marginalized because of their race, their minority race. Sometimes it's because of something, because they're gender nonconforming, or gay, or trans, or something. But that's the idea, is that these sort of minority groups are now equity deserving. So critical theory is about centering them and favoring them and representing them, and I guess trying to balance the scale. So it comes from a sort of a worthy place. But in practice, everyone that I've looked at who has studied critical theory, and how the one expert I interviewed in my piece, Stephen Reich, he is puzzled as how do you operationalize this theory? It's a lot of talk about historically marginalized and equity deserving, but in practice, when you have a classroom, say 30 kids, and it's multicultural society, how exactly are we centering? Who are we centering, and how exactly is that? The term he uses is how exactly is it operationalized? So put into practice.
And I think that's so key because, one of the criticisms that's raised about critical theory and about the way that DEI is implemented, and again, DEI, these words are inherently positive things. I think diversity is a good thing. I think inclusivity is a great thing. I think equity and equality, depending on which you use, the implications are different, but it's how that mechanics, how that mechanism is used. And when you talk about, a multicultural classroom, you could look at all of the different group identifiers that we have. You have sexual orientation, you have sex, you have gender identity, you have race, you have religion, you have class, which often isn't spoken about, and I think is probably a greater determinant of a lot of what your experiences may look like in terms of what school you go to, what university you get into. And when you bring that up, people say, well, yes, that's intersectionality. You have to look at how all of those things intersect. Okay, fine. But we're still left with a worldview that really tries to pit these experiences against each other, it seems.
Yeah, you're right about that. And like I am a parent of two small children that are in the elementary school system. So I became aware of these issues because of my own kids and because of what the school was doing. What just seems so backwards about this, and what I've in my own research, I've not been able to get a good answer, is how when you're teaching children, how does a child learn better when they see themselves in the lesson, or when the lesson somehow reflects their lived experience? Because that's what the critical race theorists want. Instead of like the traditional teaching, top-down approach, teacher-centric approach, where you kind of consider kids to be somewhat empty vessels, and you want to fill their minds with information that is not in their lived experience. But that the critical theory people are doing the exact opposite. They want to teach kids. It's almost like saying we want to teach kids things they already know so that they can relate to it and they don't feel alienated, like it doesn't reflect their lived experience.
A lot of our discussion, I'll admit, has come across as academic because we're talking about theories that are abstract, are at times malleable. If you're a parent who wants to believe the best in the education system, you're probably wondering right now how this has anything to do with your kid learning the alphabet and your kid learning how to count and how to multiply. So where is that getting translated into, specifically at the elementary school level, what kids are learning in your view?
Well, I would even lean again on kind of Stephen Reich, the expert that I interviewed in my piece, because he is sort of saying that it's not measurable. It's the critical theory is a sort of speculative theory where we're talking about, we're saying all these terms, equity and inclusivity and diversity, but how do we actually measure in a quantifiable way, like what kids are learning? Are they advancing? Are they developing literacy and numeracy and things like this? The critical theory framework, it seems to leave things open for the teachers. It's not concrete and definite. It's all about kind of, living in the moment and trying to, like a teacher is supposed to identify when there's a situation that's happening in classroom where they can talk about equity and social justice. It's very bizarre. It seems to me as a parent, I feel like already maybe I'm biased, but I feel like the academic emphasis it's just not there in the schools. My kids very rarely have homework. When they do, it's not very challenging homework. There seems to be no direction to it. They're not building on knowledge. It's just random all the time. And it does not seem academic, like centered on academics, like the way the liberal arts education, sort of that Western tradition that we have.
My experience is obviously a little bit dated now, perhaps dated by an extent that I don't want to admit to, but I had a lot of fantastic teachers. I had teachers that weren't great, but even the teachers that weren't great, it was nothing to do with a political bias or an ideological bias. I was never made to feel less than by. I had one teacher that cracked a fat joke about me once. That was about as bad as it got. But the reality is that there are teachers now, and you see the odd teacher that goes viral on TikTok that I'm like, what on earth is in the classroom? But I'm also having trouble understanding how it gets there. Are these people that go into teaching because they want to be an activist, or are these people that are being for lack of a better term, subjected to this in their education teaching and then translating that and relaying that to their student? How is this ending up in the classroom? And what numbers are we talking about here? Because I do want to believe that most teachers are there because they like kids, they like learning, they like education, and that's really shaped their experience and the reason they're there.
I think it's a minority of radical activists, just like in all institutions across society where these activists have sort of entered. But
a loud minority is the caveat I would probably put there, right?
A very loud and powerful minority that has the majority in fear because of the cancel culture. Like Woke Watch Canada, I have a number of Canadian teachers and elementary school and high school teachers that are writing for Woke Watch Canada, most of them anonymously for obvious reasons. But they're talking about their experiences. They are non-woke teachers, so they're not pushing this stuff on their students. But they talk about how they're pressured to. The boards are pressuring them to adopt all of these ideas. And like my own kids' school, middle school, I didn't really identify any like super woke teachers. But there was like some activist sloganeering posters and things like that I thought was inappropriate for my kid's school. Only goes up to grade 6. These things were in their hallway, and I thought it was inappropriate, and I don't know why it was there. My daughter didn't understand what it was talking about, but they do want to put these social justice ideas and themes in front of kids. And this does extend when we talk about age appropriateness. Probably the most alarming trend is the library books that have, I guess they would fit under sort of the gender critical theory, where we're talking about sexually inappropriate themes that are in library books, and super woke teachers are sometimes using these books and bringing them into the classroom to explain trans or non-binary or whatever.
Well, I was going to bring up, and I think the library book comment there is a natural segue to this idea that it becomes incredibly difficult for parents to really be on top of this because the curriculum is public. Anyone can go and look at the curriculum. Yeah. I would say most people probably haven't, and that includes parents. But there is also this huge volume of additional material that can be brought in by teachers on their own to supplement it. And a lot of this is created by activist groups. A lot of it is created by unions and is not as readily available. I know True North has occasionally reported on some of these, like teaching guides that ETFO, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, puts together, and it's not online anywhere. The only way we get it is when a teacher sends it to us, and that's not transparent like the curriculum is. And there are a lot of things like that I do think were beneficial. Like, and I don't know how you'd, from a policy perspective, change that. You know, any external resource that a teacher brings into the classroom should be publicly available. Maybe that's the way you do it, because I don't believe that teachers should be prevented from bringing in things they find outside the curriculum that might be of value. But that's where a lot of, I'd say, the more harmful or contentious issues are coming from.
Yeah. A potential solution is discussed in Eric Kaufman's newest book, The Third Awakening, I believe it's called. He might have been referring more to universities, but I could see something like this working at the K through 12 level too. And that would be some sort of third party, maybe government oversight, where the purpose is to do some sort of an audit of the classroom, even just of what's hung on the walls and it's in the hallways, to make sure that it's not just leaning one side politically. If they're going to be talking about political themes at all, then show some balance, show some left-wing type causes and ideas, and show some that more people conservative associate with. If there was some of that balance, it wouldn't feel like we're sending our kids to a left-wing indoctrination factory. But right now, as a parent, like when I drop these kids off every day during the school year, that's exactly what it feels like. It's an unnerving feeling, to say the least.
The essay in C2C Journal, Transforming Children, Critical Theory Takes Over Canadian Schools, written by James Pugh, publisher of Woke Watch, who joins me now. James, thanks so much for coming on today. Good to speak to you.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
All right. Thanks very much for that, James. I said earlier that I had an announcement to make, and I guess I have run out of additional topics, so I should probably get to that now. This is, I am not sorry to say, but in some ways I am, and you'll understand why in a second here. This is going to be the last episode of the Andrew Lawton Show for the foreseeable future. I am, effective at the end of this show, going on leave from True North. That includes my editorial role and also my role as host of what has become and very proudly maintained its status as Canada's most irreverent talk show. And I will tell you why, but I just want to say how immensely proud I have been to serve as a part of this team and to help build True North in a way by taking a role in what 6 years ago when I joined was a relatively small organization founded by my good friend Candace Malcolm, because there was a void in Canadian media in talking about a lot of the issues that matter to people like you and talking about it in a way that resonates and in a way that is accountable to what we believe and what I think so much of the legacy media has not been offering. And I have taken a number of roles in that, and we've seen the organization grow in that time that I've been here, for just a few people in 2018 to now a team of pretty much 20. And it's been a tremendous pleasure and a tremendous honor. And while I am not leaving permanently at this time, a lot of that will depend on what happens next, because I am going to be seeking a nomination for the Conservative Party of Canada in the riding of Elgin, St. Thomas, London South. Now, I realize that to some, this may be something that doesn't surprise you. I've had people over the years that have said I should run, and it's certainly something I've anticipated maybe in my life doing, but was never committed to fully until an opportunity arose, and I reflected on it. I talked about it with family. I prayed about it, and have reached the decision that I'm sharing with you now. And I wanted you to hear it from me first, which is why this is actually the announcement. And I am so glad to be doing it on this platform. I think it's clear to you what I stand for and what I believe. I've spent my whole career advocating for conservatism, for freedom, for common sense, and I have never been entirely all in on the best vehicle to do that, because I realize that changes. I used to work in conventional radio and hosted a show that allowed me to guest host for Danielle Smith, who's now the Premier of Alberta, in Calgary, and guest host in Toronto and guest host nationally, although my home was always in London, Ontario, where I've lived basically my whole life. And then the opportunity came to serve those values and those ideas with True North. And I've had the time of my life doing it. Part of my record at True North includes suing the government for access to cover the leaders' debates, and we won. And the lawsuit, if you look in the books, is Lawton v. Canada. And what a great little feather in my cap to have, knowing that Lawton won and Canada, in that case, lost. But as I've looked at the political landscape and I've thought about the way that I can best serve, this is an opportunity that I do not want to pass up. Now, this is a riding that's currently held by Conservative Member of Parliament Karen Vecchio, who has just announced this week that she's not running again. And Karen has been a dedicated community constituency-focused Member of Parliament. I've known her for many years. I've known her since she was the candidate taking over for Joe Preston, who I got the chance to know before that, who represented the riding for about 11 years. Karen has, by the time of the next election, a decade of service under her belt, and I know that she is beloved in that community, and I wish her very well on the next step of the journey. But as you see over my shoulder since the book came out, I wrote a biography of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, and I just, because some of you may have questions about it, had no idea this is where my life would take me when I started writing that book. And in fact, this didn't come up until long after I had finished it. But what better way to offer an endorsement of a set of values that I've spent my career advocating for than to say that I'm standing right now for a nomination in a party that I believe is going to be the best vehicle to champion those values. And that's something that I hope to do if I'm nominated as a candidate. It's something I hope to do if I'm elected as a member of parliament, and if a Conservative government is elected with Pierre Poilievre as Prime Minister. And I should just make a point of clarifying here. I'm speaking on my own behalf now. True North is not a partisan organization, but I thought it was so tremendously important that you hear from me what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in this to reach out to me after the show. I'm going to be pivoting into a very different mode and wearing a very different hat once I hang up this microphone, metaphorically. I guess it's already hanging, but you know what I mean. But you can email me at andrew@andrewlawton.ca, and my website, which has always been my website, andrewlawton.ca, has a bit of a different look now, and I welcome you to join me there. But I want to say before I close things out for the show today, how so very grateful I am to Candace Malcolm for building True North and allowing me to take on all the roles I've had here. And there is a huge team behind the scenes as well that you don't see. And I have to give a particular thanks to Sean, who you often hear me mention. You've only seen on the show once because he's so focused on moving all the levers and buttons and switches and things to make the show happen and make me look good. And when something screws up, it's like almost always a technical issue and not Sean. But he's the one furiously working in the background to make sure that this show happens. And we made a choice not that long ago in the grand scheme of things to do things live because it was a lot more fun and a lot more keeping with the spirit of this show and True North. But also folks like Phil and Steve and William and our whole team of writers and other folks as well who I can't name because, as I said, our team has gotten so big. But it's been a tremendous pleasure. And again, if I lose, you're stuck with me. I'm coming back. But if I win, we'll have to see where things go from there. But a huge thank you to all of you. Many of you have been with me since before I joined True North. You followed me here after having listened to me on the radio, and folks have come out to me on the street. Even this morning, I was picking up something at a little shop, and someone said, "Are you Andrew Lawton?" And I think it was because they watched this very show. So I could not do any of what I do without you, whether it's been, holding the elites to account on the streets of Davos, whether it's been following Justin Trudeau around because they wouldn't let us get on the campaign plane in 2019, whether it's been actually getting on a campaign plane in 2021 when we went to cover the Conservatives under Aaron O'Toole for a time. We have done all of this as an organization because of you, because of people like you that supported independent media, supported the work that True North is doing, and supported me personally. And I've had the chance to learn about you and what you value and read your emails and read your comments. And it's been the honor and pleasure of a lifetime. It is an exciting step for me, but also one that is bittersweet in a way because it's impossible to do effectively a media role and a political role simultaneously. But I hope you'll follow me on what happens next. As I said earlier, my website is andrewlawton.ca. And for the last time for the foreseeable future, thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.